Hey everybody, this is Miss Piggin. Welcome to the Renaissance Room. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the word Renaissance to start us off. The word Renaissance means rebirth in French. Can you speak French? I can say a little bit. Bonjour. The Renaissance was a time period in history, specifically a time period on the continent of Europe. The Renaissance started in the 14th century, which is actually the 1300s, just like right now is a 21st century, but it's only year 2020. The Renaissance reached its most successful and popular time in the 1400s, which is also known as the 15th century. That's like going viral. There were a lot of changes that came with the Renaissance. Big changes. Some of those changes were new scientific laws, new styles of art and architecture. And architecture is buildings like a home or a church. And it also brought about new religious ideas. There were many people that lived during the Renaissance that we still remember today. And even sometimes they take those people's names and use them in a cartoon. Let me give you an example. Ever heard of Leonardo or Michelangelo or Raphael or Donatello? You might be thinking of the Ninja Turtles, but those are actual people that lived during the Renaissance, and they are some of the most famous artists ever known. Leonardo da Vinci did a lot of things, not just painting. He was a master of mathematics. He painted, he sculpted with different materials like stone. He built and designed buildings. He was a musician. He liked to learn new math. He was an engineer. We're working on different buildings and structures, how they work and how to make them better. He invented new creations. He was a geologist. He was a cartographer, which is somebody that likes to draw maps. He was a botanist, which means he worked with plants. And he was a writer. He loved to write. He had a diary that he would keep his notes in, and he even wrote backwards. So you'd have to hold his journal up to a mirror in order to be able to read what he wrote. Have you ever written a diary? Well, maybe you should try, because you never know. You might be a famous person one day, and everybody that comes after you will want to know, what were you thinking? What cool ideas did you have in your mind? We're going to have a book for you that you're going to create where you can collect all your work that you're going to be doing in the Renaissance Room, just like Leonardo did with all his great inventions and thinking. Some of Da Vinci's most famous work you may have even heard of. Have you ever heard of the Mona Lisa? That's his biggest one, even though it's actually really small. He also painted The Last Supper, which, if you are a follower of the Christian faith, that is an event out of the New Testament where Jesus sat down with his disciples and shared his last meal. Another one of his famous pieces was his airplane. He tried to design an airplane in his diary. It wouldn't have worked based on what we now know on flight, but at the time it was very revolutionary. He was never able to build the entire plane. It was more of just a drawing. That's why today you're going to be working on some sketches in your creation book as well, not just paintings. Another one of those Ninja Turtles was actually another famous painter named Michelangelo. Michelangelo was very similar to Leonardo, where he did so many different things, like painting, but also he was an engineer. He was an architect, like I said, worked on buildings. He sculpted, so making figures out of stones and clay. He was a poet, so not only did he like to write, but he wrote poetry. And he also was very influential. That means he worked really hard to be really good, so other people looked at his work and felt moved and inspired to make their own art and talk about art and feel some emotions that they may not have felt right away. His most famous painting is actually not on a canvas at all. It's not on a piece of paper. It's not on a poster. It's actually on a ceiling. There's a church called the Sistine Chapel that he painted the whole ceiling, and it is gorgeous. That's why some people say Michelangelo is the most famous artist from the Renaissance, not Leonardo da Vinci. Another of our top 4 Renaissance men is Raphael. Raphael was known for his work to show how awesome people are, how larger than life we really can be. One of Raphael's most famous pieces is the School of Athens. The School of Athens piece shows that education is so important to society. And that's why you're learning today, because even if it's summertime and even if you've done a lot of online learning recently, education is going to give you so many opportunities in life. So the more you keep learning, the more successful you will be. And Raphael definitely believed that. Our last of our top 4 is Donatello. Donatello was a sculptor. Donatello worked with a lot of different materials. He worked with stone, bronze, wood, clay, stucco, which some of your houses may be stucco, and wax. Donatello is very well known for his sculptures that depicted a lot of religious icons, like David from the Old Testament of the Bible and the Christian faith, or the crucifixion, which was the death of a man named Jesus in the New Testament of the Bible of the Christian faith. All 4 of these men, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, and Donatello, they all focused on their faith, which was Christianity. And you can see in their art and their creations how much their religion was important to them. During the Renaissance, artwork was not the only focus. Another big movement in the Renaissance was religion. The majority of Italy was Catholic, which is a type of Christianity. But then came along a man named Martin Luther. Not Martin Luther King. He lived in the 1950s in the United States of America. We're talking about Martin Luther, who was born in 1483 in Germany. He himself was a priest. He used to read from the Bible in front of hundreds of people and talk about his faith and help people with their faith. But he started to think how the rules and expectations of the Catholic branch of Christianity was not what he believed. He decided to create his own branch of Christianity called Protestantism. Today, Protestantism is very popular, but in the Renaissance, it was brand new. But that's where King Henry VIII comes in. He was the King of England. He started off his life as a Catholic, but as he grew up, he realized he did not believe what the Catholics believed, and he had heard about Martin Luther's creation of Protestantism. So as king, because he had all the power, he decided to have the Church of England separate from the Catholic Church in Rome. King Henry VIII was considered a Renaissance man. What does that mean? Well, he was tall, he was good looking, he was really good at riding horses, which was considered a sport for only the wealthy and the famous. King Henry VIII was also athletic, he was a musician, he wrote his own music, and he could fight. But what most people know King Henry VIII for is that he had 6 wives. One of King Henry VIII's marriages was to Queen Anne, and they had one daughter, and she became Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I ruled over England for 44 years. Queen Elizabeth I did not become queen easily. She had different siblings, and when King Henry VIII passed away, his son, King Edward, became king. But he died at only 15 years old. Another one of King Henry's daughters, Mary, she became queen. Queen Mary was not popular. She was really mean to a lot of the people that lived in England. She wasn't a very good sister either. Even though Elizabeth was not in line to become queen, Queen Mary thought her half-sister was trying to steal the throne. So instead of talking to her sister about how she felt, she threw her own sister in prison. Elizabeth had to spend 2 months in a tower, almost like a Disney movie. But tragedy struck, and Queen Mary died. And very quickly, Elizabeth went from prisoner to Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth was only 25 years old when she was crowned queen. She was a really popular queen. She used to go see people, even in really rural villages where nobody ever went unless you lived there. She wanted to see the people that she was in charge of. She wanted to speak to them and learn from them and be the best queen she could ever be, unlike her sister, her brother, and her father. Not everybody loved her. Some of her own family was really mad that she was in charge, and they were always trying to ruin her life. It was probably because they were really jealous. Something really fun about Queen Elizabeth is that she loved dressing fancy. She loved ruffles, she loved braids, she loved wide sleeves, and really intricate patterns and embroidery. Her crowns had jewels, her dresses had jewels. She was stunning. She would have been #1 on every social media site if she lived today. Another really cool fact about Queen Elizabeth I is that she loved plays, going to stages, watching actors, and laughing. A specific writer that you might have heard of is a man named William Shakespeare. He wrote a lot of different plays, and she loved all of his work. She used to go see them quite often. Another famous figure during the Renaissance is someone that was not a painter or an artist. It was a scientist. His name is Paracelsus, and he discovered something so obvious today, but back then they didn't know. He discovered that if you stay healthy, you live longer. Staying healthy could mean getting exercise, eating healthy foods, going outside, spending time with loved ones and friends, so you're happy. But he realized that they were related, being happy and healthy, to a long life. We know that now, but thanks to Paracelsus, the Renaissance learned that too. And our final famous figure that we'll be talking about today is Christopher Columbus. I'm sure a lot of you have heard his name before. He was one of many famous explorers that went from Europe all the way across the Atlantic Ocean and found what we now know as Canada, North America, Central America, and South America. Some of these explorers sailed up and down the coast to draw what the edge of the land looked like. Some explorers discovered other civilizations, as well as materials like gold or food like chocolate. Even though Christopher Columbus wasn't very kind to the people that were already living in the Americas, he was a very famous explorer, and thanks to him and a handful of other gentlemen, Europe finally realized that the world was much, much bigger. The lifestyle of the Renaissance was very different than today. If somebody from the Renaissance time traveled to 2020, they would be really surprised by a lot of things. But probably the first thing they would notice is where everybody lived, all the different homes and apartments that are available to us now. During the Renaissance, you really had two options. If you weren't wealthy, you lived in a hut. If you were wealthy, you lived in a really big house. But even their large houses didn't have plumbing. That means they did not have any running water. There was no electricity yet either, so they would have been really dark. And Europe is much farther north than where we are in South Carolina, and as a result, it's much, much colder in the wintertime. So they didn't have heat, they didn't have lights, they didn't have running water, so it was dark, cold, and probably really smelly. They also had a very different way of eating. The people that lived in the huts, because they weren't wealthy, they really only ate bread and thick stew. During the Renaissance, people loved to be entertained. They would go to plays, they would play different games like chess or checkers. They also loved parties. The biggest party they would have was the party right before Lent. Lent is 40 days before Easter, and that is when people who are practicing Catholics give up one thing, maybe two, that they love a lot that may not be good for them, like chocolate. The day before Lent starts, the people of the Renaissance threw a huge party, and it would be a masquerade where people would wear masks over their face. That's why one of the activities you have is designing a mask to join in on the fun. Shopping during the Renaissance was really confusing. Today, if you had a $1 bill, you could go to Walmart or Publix or Food Lion or even the dollar store, and that $1 would be the same thing. But back in the Renaissance, every city had different money. So if you lived in one town, you had a certain type of money that may be certain kind of gold coins and some pieces of paper. But another town, they may have silver coins and different kinds of pieces of paper. It was really hard to buy things when you traveled to different cities. Most of the time, people just traded. How we treat children today is very different than how they were treated at the beginning of the Renaissance in Europe. At the very beginning of the Renaissance, children weren't treated like children at all. They were treated like tiny adults. They had to work. They were expected to speak just as an adult would speak. They were expected to pick up things and make things and feed themselves. As soon as they got old enough to be able to work on the farm or in the house or help cook, they were put to work. As the Renaissance went along, more and more people became wealthy, and as a result, how people treated children became very different. They were allowed to be kids and play. They were allowed to have friends. Also, school is very different. School was mostly for wealthy people, and not just any wealthy children, specifically boys. Yep, girls, that's right. You weren't supposed to get an education, but all you boys out there would have had a chance to go to school. You had two options. You can either go away to school, like people do for college, or somebody came to your house called a private tutor, kind of like a one-on-one teacher in your home. The kids mostly learned two things: math and grammar. Some of the men did study a few other subjects, like Latin, which is a foreign language, philosophy, which is a really big word for the study of thinking. And some men studied public speaking, hopefully to become a great leader one day. Here are some other really cool facts about the Renaissance. Number 1, ballet was invented during the Renaissance. Do any of you dance? Have any of you tried ballet? It's really difficult. Fact number 2, some of the most famous food for the wealthy were peacocks and swans. Fact number 3, a violin was invented in the Renaissance. So before the European Renaissance, there were no violins. And fact number 4, the printing press was created. Before the printing press, if you wanted a book, you had to handwrite the entire thing. There was no way to print it off from something that was already written. Thanks to Gutenberg's invention of the printing press, we're now able to have books. And isn't that awesome that we have books available to everybody, no matter how much money their parents make? Before, you had to be so wealthy to just get one book. So even though going to school or having a private teacher come to your home was really for the wealthy, the rich, and the famous, books were available to almost everybody. And that allowed more and more people to get an education. The last little bit I want to talk about with the Renaissance is the music and the dance. Just like today, during the Renaissance, music was a form of art and entertainment. Some of you may be familiar with this idea. There's a lot of apps, like TikTok, where there are dances that people have so much fun with, but also people watch those videos to be entertained. In 2020, we have some dance moves that are mostly with our upper body, where you might cross over your shoulders, or you clap, or you shimmy. But back in the Renaissance, there were 4 major dance steps that were popular. One was called the reverence. This was a greeting step where the dancers would face each other. They would then slide the left foot back and bend both knees to bow to the other dancer. Another dance move was the saltarello. This was a lively dance step.
Desdice, spezzato, spezzato, step, step, desdice, step, step, spezzato, trap, desdice, step, step, spezzato, trap, desdice, spezzato, and trap, and corin, 2, 3, 4, spezzato.
Another dance move was the pavane. This was a slow walking dance that gave dancers a chance to show off their fancy clothes and gowns. It was usually the first dance of the night. The last popular dance move was the Italian double. It was a step where the dancers would take 2 elegant steps forward and then rise up on their toes. Every festival, party, event, wedding, and any other forms of public gathering were met with music and dance. Music during the Renaissance was very different than it is for us today. A major part of the music in the Renaissance were choirs. Do you go to school with a choir? Are you in chorus? Do you like to sing? A chorus is when a whole bunch of people get together and sing the same song. Choirs were really popular in churches because the ceilings on the churches were so tall that the sound would echo all over the place, and it was a very beautiful sound. Another popular way of singing was called the madrigal. The madrigal usually had between 3 and 6 singers, but it could have had more. There were 3 instruments that were very popular during the Renaissance that you may not even find anywhere in America in 2020. The first one is the harpsichord. This instrument looks like a piano with keys, but when a key is played, a string is plucked rather than hit like a normal piano. Another instrument, which has a really funny name, is the hurdy-gurdy. The hurdy-gurdy is a stringed instrument, kind of like the violin, but it's where melodies are played on a small keyboard and then crank-turn wheels rub against the strings instead of a person with a bow. Another instrument that was really popular was the lute. This was a stringed instrument, kind of like a guitar, with a round back instead of flat like we have today. The strings were plucked, just like guitars, in order to make the sound. A composer is somebody that takes a bunch of different ideas of what music should sound like, take a whole bunch of instruments or people's voices, and put them all together and make magnificent artwork with sound. One of the most famous composers of the Renaissance was William Byrd. You'll be hearing a lot of his music in between the videos for the Renaissance Room. Composers were allowed to be successful because of the printing press. In order to have 50 people playing the exact same music on their own personal instrument, everybody has to have the paper with the music in front of them. So these composers, instead of handwriting all 50 pieces of music, they would go to the printing press, write one copy, and print it for everybody else. During the Renaissance, singing or chorus music was way more popular than instrument music. Even though singing was more popular than playing an instrument, they still would add drums or other forms of percussion, like tambourines, in the performance. While ballet was invented in Italy, it was way more popular in France, and it still is today. All right, class, that was a lot of information from a lot of different parts of the life of the Renaissance. What you need to do is choose 4 most exciting pieces of information you learned and write about them and do some drawings on the Renaissance cube that Mrs. Gailey has shown you how to make. During your time in the Renaissance room, you will be creating a lot of similar pieces that were created during the Renaissance, from art to music to scientific inventions. While history shows us that the Renaissance was great because of how much money people had and how talented they were, what's really important to know is that all of these people were everyday people like you. They had the idea to create new things. They had the idea to challenge themselves. They had the idea to try new things that might be beautiful. Sometimes they were successful, sometimes they were not. But the Renaissance is the time that we remember as the new birth of music, art, and technology. And even though the year 2020 is a little bit of a rough start to a new 10 years, we can still learn from the Renaissance and try new things, create new things, take chances, take risks, and try and create works of art, pieces of music, and new inventions to make the world a better place every single day. Enjoy! Bye!